Hello everyone, my name is Kong Shrinani and welcome to my YouTube channel, Neuro Chat with AG. On this channel, I plan to cover topics that are closest to my heart and support the neurodiverse community. Topics related to neurodiversity, autism, late autism diagnosis, and autism in women and girls. I will interview thought leaders, esteemed researchers, scientists, professors, doctors, and psychologists and seek their views and updates on their latest work and research. I will also chat with parents of neurodiverse kids and adults and talk about experiences of neurodiverse individuals. Lastly, keeping inclusivity as a topmost priority, we might also discuss controversial disparate views for a collective understanding of issues and respect for diverse views. All the views and topics discussed are for informational purposes only. If you are interested in watching more quality content on this topic, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to press the bell icon to be notified whenever a new video is uploaded. Please also share the channel with your friends, family, and social media platforms. Thank you. Miss Ruth Horowitz is a dedicated advocate and insightful voice within the autistic community, particularly focused on the experiences of late diagnosed autistic adults. Having personally navigated the complexities of masking autism for much of her life, Ruth brings a deep lived understanding of the challenges and impacts that masking can have on mental, emotional, and physical well being. Her work and personal journey offer valuable perspectives on how societal pressures shape the experience of autistic individuals and what can be done to foster a more inclusive and understanding environment for those who receive an autism diagnosis later in life. After getting diagnosed at age 57, Ms. Horowitz wrote her memoir, Living with Autism Undiagnosed, a raw and powerful reflection on her journey, offering readers a glimpse into a life filled with love, war, abuse, homelessness, and resilience, spanning 2 continents. Her story is a roller coaster ride of triumphs and tragedies, capturing the challenges of navigating a world that was not designed for her. Beyond her personal narrative, Ruth has dedicated her research and advocacy to elevating awareness of autism, particularly among women and girls. Her work challenges traditional autism narratives, which have historically focused on male presentations, and highlights the unique way autism manifests across genders. This effort underscores her commitment to creating a more inclusive and accurate understanding of autism and all its diversity. Ms. Horowitz, welcome and thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to jump right into it, what made you think of going for a diagnosis at the age of 57?
I didn't. I was being treated for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And while I was in residential care for that, the staff there figured out that I was autistic and tested me. And the psychiatrist who tested me said that I mask very well, that they had a hard time figuring it out, but they managed to piece it together.
Yeah, and in your book, you describe masking as a sort of survival tool. So could you share how masking manifested in your life before your diagnosis?
Well, from what I have gathered from listening and reading to other autistics describe how they mask, the way I mask is somewhat different from the way other autistics mask. I'm not so much concerned with people liking me because I realized at a very young age that I am not like other people, and that no matter how hard I try, a lot of people aren't going to like me. So my masking was more around how do I want to present myself to the world? How do I want people to see me? And I didn't want people to see me as weak or incompetent or unable, which later on turned out to make things harder for me because when I hit walls, I couldn't get anyone to listen to me because everyone was so convinced, oh, she's so strong, she's so capable, she's so competent, she'll figure it out. She doesn't need our help. And so when I actually needed help, I wasn't able to get through that. I really needed help now.
How do you think this kind of the masking shaped your experiences in different parts of your life, like through love, work, or adversity?
I think it actually made it harder because people didn't understand. I didn't understand what exactly I was dealing with. I mean, I could be falling apart at the seams, and to the outside world, I looked like I was doing just fine. And so I would go out into the world, present myself in a certain way, and then go home and just collapse until it was time for me to leave the next day and go out into the world again.
Did you notice any physical effects or health issues that you now attribute to years of masking?
The most significant is effects from medication I was forced to take that I didn't need after I was misdiagnosed with major depressive disorder, which I do not have. Um, I was in autistic burnout, and because I mostly cry when I'm having a meltdown, it looks a lot like major depressive disorder. But when I'm not in autistic burnout, I'm actually a very happy person. So, and the antidepressants weren't working, they weren't helping, but I couldn't get them to listen to me. They just kept upping my dose and upping my dose and upping my dose until I started having serious side effects from it.
Mhm.
Um, Other than that, developing complex post-traumatic stress disorder actually had more effects on my physical health, but they're connected. I think um, if I had been diagnosed earlier and hadn't had to mask so heavily, I might not have developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And from that, I developed very severe insomnia, which has huge impacts um, on my function.
In what ways, did masking impact your relationship with your family, friends, and colleagues?
No one actually knows who I am. I just presented what I wanted people to see, and just hid from the whole world my entire life. Hid all my struggles, hid all my confusion, um, because it seemed like no one was listening to me anyways. And so I decided to just put on a brave face, walk out into the world as ready to take it on, and that was it.
How do you think, like looking at yourself, how do you think your self-perception or identity has kind of evolved since your diagnosis?
So this is something I heard from another late diagnosed woman, which was brilliant in my idea, and I wish I remembered her name. She said that getting a diagnosis was like getting an answer sheet to your life. And it's just so true. Um, and I struggle to understand um, parents who don't want to get their child diagnosed because they're afraid of giving them that label. But it's not giving them a label, it's giving them answers. It's giving them what they need, the information that they need in order to navigate better through life. It's so confusing and so debilitating to not know you're autistic and to not be able to find the answers when they're all right there, easy to find when you know.
Moving on to like, the next kind of topic. Um, as I'm sure you know, data shows that we have 1 to 4 autism diagnosed ratio as we compare girls to boys. And while this number is improving, what are your views on autism diagnosis among girls as compared to boys?
It is improving. It's definitely improving, but we are still missing a lot of girls, especially the more intelligent ones who are better at masking from a young age. Um, and I also think that overall, we haven't quite recognized all the different iterations of autism that exist, especially the more highly intelligent, highly competent, high achieving types of autistics who do not necessarily get caught at a young age. Um, and some men that fall under that category also get missed, I think. Um, there's so much focus on the negatives of autism rather than the positives of autism that it pushes the diagnosis towards the more impaired rather than the more gifted. And this is a shame because those of us who are more gifted could actually do so much more with our lives with a diagnosis and with the knowledge and with the ability to understand what we're dealing with than we can just struggling and not understanding well, why did I react that way all of a sudden? What happened to me? I don't know. I know I can't control it, but I don't know how to explain what I did or why I did it. Just completely baffled. Um, or why work changes, everyone else is fine with them, and you stop being able to function because of them. And you don't know how to explain it. And you keep trying to say, no, I just need things to go back the way they were. And it's like, well, everyone else can deal with it, so you have to deal with it too. Except you can't, and you can't explain it. Um, so it is actually very important for us to know that we're autistic so that we can get the accommodations that we need so that we can excel and be better contributing members of society. Um, there seems to be a desire from the medical community to portray autism as this completely negative thing, and it's not. Um, yes, we have our struggles, and yes, we have things that are different about us, but everyone does. And the things that we struggle with, you can consider them to be a disorder. Sometimes they're a positive. I mean, um, advertising, for example, has no effect on me whatsoever. And I see that as a positive. Um, Scamming, I can see through scams in a second. Um, and yes, there are autistics who are more vulnerable to these things, but I'm talking right now about those of us who are high masking, high intelligent, highly capable, and we're the ones that society really, really needs. And society is kind of shunning us and pushing us aside and making our lives harder rather than helping us be better contributing members of society. I think there is a lot of high intelligence in autistic girls, and we get missed a lot because of this focus on um, the more impaired side of autism. And the the bias is so severe that autistics who get diagnosed at a young age often end up hating themselves because they're constantly hearing such negative things about autism all the time that they end up just completely unable to function because they're convinced that they can do nothing right. Although I have to admit that I often felt that way too. um, Being undiagnosed, it just felt like I can't ever get anything right. But I do know that I can get some things right. I am very good at certain things. Um, but there is this tendency to feel like we can't ever get anything right. And this piling on by society just makes it worse.
Mhm.
And we do need to focus more on girls, and we need to focus more on um, getting help to the right help, not negative, you're disordered, there's something wrong with you, but rather you have gifts and talents um, that can be useful, and let's find a way to help you implement them and integrate you into society better rather than pull us down
Mhm.
and tell us we're no good.
Um, and your memoir spans very diverse settings and experiences. So, how do you think autism and intersected with all these moments?
Oh, I kept trying to find some place where I would fit it. Um, it never really seemed to exist. Um, Oddly enough, now that I know I'm autistic and I can tell people that I'm autistic, I actually feel like I'm more accepted. Like, people suddenly understand, oh, she's not doing this on purpose. She's just autistic. So it's no big deal. Um, so in many ways, knowing that I'm autistic, and being able to tell people that I'm autistic has actually helped me. I can see where it can have a negative effect on people, but I will say that if you tell someone you're autistic and they react negative to you, and it has happened to me, um, it's just someone you really don't need in your life. I'd rather tell people I'm autistic. I've had to correct people. I've had to explain where they're wrong with their understanding of autism. Like one of my dance partners was under the impression that autism is caused by vaccines, but I was able to get through to him, especially after he read my book. All the different settings that I've been through just made life more confusing, especially moving from um, different cultures back and forth between different cultures. And because I have a hard enough time understanding a single culture, trying to navigate two different cultures was incredibly confusing for me.
How do you think findings inform the development of policies or programs aimed at supporting autistic girls?
I don't see that there's anything specific for girls in general. Um, it's all lumped into one thing, and it is something that I would like to start getting more involved with in. Um, I'm looking for ways to have more impact. It's been slow going because of the autistic burnout. Um, but now that I'm finally coming out of it, I'm slowly finding my voice bit by bit, hoping to get some things that we can get to our state legislature next year. Um, and maybe even possibly um, trying to get some things done at the federal level, but that's going to be more complicated. I think it's going to take some collaboration to do something like that.
And what role do you see for parents and caregivers in addressing, the needs and challenges faced by autistic girls?
I don't think it's just autistic girls. I think it's autistics in general. First of all, stop trying to turn us into neurotypicals. We're not. We never will be. All you're doing is making it harder for us when you do that. Accept that it's okay to be autistic. The more okay you are with being with your child or the person you're caring for being autistic, the more okay they will be with it. Try to focus on our strengths and our positives. I'm not saying ignore the negatives. I'm not saying don't address them at all. But when that's all you focus on, it it's really damaging because then we start to see ourselves as only negative. And there's so much negativity around autism. It's very, very hard to remain positive. Now, on the flip side, there are also groups who try to say that being autistic is better than not being autistic, and I have a problem with that too. I think we're all different. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, talents, and there's no better or worse. We're all just part of the fabric of humanity. And the world needs all of us. We all contribute in our own way. Also, when it comes to the negatives of autism, we do need to recognize that sometimes it's not coming from autism. Um, Sometimes it's coming from comorbidities. I know that things changed dramatically for me after I developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Things became so much harder. Um, I lost a lot of my ability to focus. Uh, I started developing autistic burnouts. Up until that point, I didn't, at least not anything beyond a very mild one. And so we need to also recognize what's autism and what's the comorbidity or the combination of autism with the comorbidity. It's often not autism on its own. It's often autism with other things that creates most of our challenges. And also, these days, sometimes it isn't even autism because the way the DSM-5 is written, it includes other developmental disorders not otherwise specified. And I have heard about children getting diagnosed with autism who very clearly are not autistic. And that makes everything also so much harder from us because it really paints us as just a disorder rather than just people who are different. And again, I will recognize there are some very severely disordered autistics. I have a disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But there are also a lot of people who aren't autistic who have disorders, who are heavily impaired in some way. So stop saying it's autism and start recognizing it for what it is. It's comorbidities that are creating the problems, not necessarily autism.
What advice would you give to someone who suspects they might be masking their autism but hasn't received a formal diagnosis yet?
It really depends on what stage of life you're in. This is a very complex question. It's very hard to get a diagnosis as an adult. Very, very difficult. Most people who diagnose only diagnose children. So it's hard to find someone. And also, you could find someone who will do the testing and tell you you're not autistic when you are because they have some misconceptions about autism. I mean, I've heard the craziest reasons for people being told they're not autistic, like, oh, well, you're married, so you can't be autistic. Uh, um, you're able to socialize, you can't be autistic. Um, you make eye contact, you can't be autistic. I make eye contact, I'm autistic. It was one of the things that made me question the diagnosis when I first got it. And every late diagnosed autistic is going to have some sort of imposter syndrome. Mine comes up fairly frequently. And then I get reminders that, no, yeah, you really are autistic. And I'm okay with it. And I will also say that if someone offered me a pill and told me if you take this pill, you would wake up tomorrow morning and not be autistic, I would not take it. Because I have no idea who I would be if I took that pill. There are a lot of things about my autism that I think are positives, and I don't want to lose them. And what would I get instead of them? I don't know. And would I like who I am as a neurotypical? I have no idea. And so I'm going to stick with what I have.
How do you envision the future for late diagnosed autistic adults?
Again, it's a very complex, difficult question to answer. I would like there to be more services for us, at least for those of us who are in crisis when we get our diagnosis. Some people aren't. Some people figure out on their own before they're actually in crisis, and they manage to navigate it fairly well. Others are as clueless as I was, and we can get to situations where it's questionable whether we're even going to survive. And I don't think anyone should have to go through that. So I would very much like to see more services for late diagnosed autistics who are in crisis, but I think that's going to take a fair amount of time to happen. There's a tendency to focus more on children, and while I don't discount the importance of helping children. A lot of the funds that are going towards helping autistic children is going towards things that are not only not helpful, but even harmful. And we can make better use of those funds and actually really help autistics of all ages rather than force us to go through treatments that we don't need and actually harm us. Because a lot of these treatments are based on top-down um, ways of operating, and we operate bottom up. And so when you try to force top down on us, all it does is leave us more confused.
And what sort of changes do you feel are necessary for autistic adults and their, overall inclusion in society? Um, like you, so I guess there's that, long-term vision and, the steps that you think are necessary to get there.
I think that if the world could learn to see us as maybe a different culture rather than um, a disability or uh, a developmental disability, um, we're just a different culture, and include us in the acceptance of multiculturalism and just accept us for who we are and for what we are, and that it's okay for us to have the struggles that we have, and it's okay for us to be different, and recognize that sometimes the problem isn't us, the problem is the rest of society.
Um, you know, Going even deeper, what kind of support systems would you like to see?
More support systems that are focused on that bottom up approach. Um, don't just tell us what to do or that we need to do something. You need to explain to us in a way that we understand why we need to do something, why we need to change something, why this is important. Because once we understand why, it may still take us a little bit more time to get there, but we can get there. If you try and just tell us, you have to do this because I said so, because this is how society works, but we don't understand how society works and why society is the way it is, it it just makes things harder for us. Um, Start creating supports that make sense to us, that give us the information that we need, that give us the ability to actually navigate the world better, and most importantly, maybe stop making autism this terrible thing that we have to hide. Um, it's not. It can be a wonderful thing at times. Um, I'm a fantastic problem solver. Um, I can make connections between things that other people can't see or figure out in minutes. Um, we bring a lot to the table. Stop demonizing us.
And is there anything else you would like to highlight?
I'd like to talk a little bit about autistic burnout. It's something that is slowly gaining recognition. Um, I know that more in the mental health field, it's gaining recognition. The medical field, I believe, still hasn't quite caught up to autistic burnout. Um, it's extremely debilitating. Um, I am coming out of an almost 4-year severe autistic burnout. And the best way I can describe it is it's like your brain is in a coma and you can't access the things you used to be able to access. I have long lists of coping skills and ways of dealing with situations that throughout those years I couldn't access, which led to not being able to handle situations I used to be able to handle, not being able to handle um, pretty much anything. It's something that develops out of very severe overwhelm over a long period of time. So for me, it started with a shoulder injury. I was in a lot of pain, and then things just spiraled from there. And the more I couldn't get the support that I needed, the worse my overwhelm became, the more my brain shut down, the less I was able to access. Um, I was having trouble speaking. I was having trouble just the most simple tasks that I used to handle without any problem. I couldn't do anymore.
Yeah.
It's described as a loss of, um, sorry, it's described as a loss of executive function and emotional regulation. And I think that I probably in this last one, when I was at my worst, I lost about 95% of my executive function. I was barely existing for a while, for about a year. And for a long time, I didn't think I was ever going to get better. It's a very real thing. It's not uncommon for an autistic in autistic burnout to become suicidal because we can't cope. And this is where not being diagnosed can become deadly because we have no way of getting the help that we need. And I
So
may
I'd
be
like
getting into trouble by talking about this.
so I'd like to ask a quick follow-up there. Just so if you could elaborate on this. I'm sure that like from the outside, if you don't know about autistic burnout, you might think that some of these symptoms are like very similar to that of depression. So, if you could talk a little bit more about the differences between autistic burnout and depression, and even more specifically, like the difference between, you know, the things that, you would need to help you get out of it.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that it's a lot easier to prevent autistic burnout than it is to get out of it. And in order to prevent autistic burnout, we need the supports that we need. We need the accommodations that we need. And in order to get those, we need to be properly diagnosed. Let's start there. Because it's impossible. I tried to get the accommodations I needed. The problem was that the diagnosis I had was for complex post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder, which I don't have, rather than complex post-traumatic stress disorder and autism spectrum disorder. And the things I was asking for made perfect sense for an autism diagnosis. And they made very little sense for the diagnosis that I had. So I couldn't get it. And it just broke me because I knew exactly what I needed to keep functioning and I couldn't get it. So this is where having the right diagnosis is just absolutely crucial. So it's just so that we can get the accommodations that we need in order to function. And all I was asking for was they made a lot of changes for me at work. I just wanted them to put things back, make things back the way they were so that I could keep functioning because I couldn't handle the changes. Because I was already dealing with the shoulder injury. I was in so much overwhelm that anything extra just, it was impossible for me to deal with.
Differences between autistic burnout and depression, and
Oh,
their
yeah. Okay. It's hard to say exactly what the differences are between autistic burnout and depression because I don't think we really fully understand depression. Is autistic burnout a form of depression? It's possible. I can't rule that out, but it is an extremely severe condition that stems from severe overwhelm over a long period of time, lack of support. And I don't know that that is how you would define depression. I think depression can have many causes. It can be caused by a loss. Um, but then again, a loss can create overwhelm. So I would say that the first thing you need to know is the person autistic? Because if they're not autistic, it's not autistic burnout. They are autistic, it might be autistic burnout. Um, I think we're very far from being able to define the differences between the two. Maybe one major way of also telling the difference is that antidepressants don't work on autistic burnout, and they don't always work with depression. So again, it's a little bit difficult to say, but but if the medication, if antidepressants aren't working, it takes you one step closer to being able to say maybe this is autistic burnout. It's not an easy question to answer, and I'm not a therapist or a psychiatrist. I have a science degree, but it's not in psychology or psychiatry, so it's really hard for me to say.
But thank you for taking the time, to answer that. And Miss Horowitz, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation and, all the breadth of information you shared. And I wish you the very best in your future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you.